The eviction notice was a thin, crinkled thing, smelling faintly of stale cigarettes and desperation. I traced the blocky letters with a numb finger. Final notice. It felt less like a threat and more like a sigh of resignation. My landlord, a man whose face was permanently etched with the disappointment of 1,000 tenants, had finally given up on me. I couldn't blame him. My rent checks had become as mythical as a unicorn sighting. Raj, that's me. And right now, I was spectacularly broke. My freelance graphic design work had dried up faster than a puddle in a desert. Deadlines missed, clients lost. The only thing I was good at was accumulating debt. My tiny apartment, once a cozy sanctuary, now felt like a cage of peeling paint and overdue bills. The air in here was thick with the scent of instant ramen and regret. Then the lawyer's letter arrived. A thick, cream-colored envelope, embossed with a crest I didn't recognize. It spoke of a distant relative, a gray tant twice removed, someone named Elara Vance. I'd never heard the name. The letter was formal, stiff, and then it dropped the bomb. I was the sole beneficiary of her estate, an estate that included a property. A rather substantial property, the letter hinted, located in a place called Blackwood Creek. The will was peculiar. It spoke of legacy, of a place that holds its breath and a fortune that would be mine, if I resided there for 1 year. A year in a mansion for untold riches. It sounded like a fairy tale, the kind that usually ends with a witch in a gingerbread house. But the desperation in my gut, the gnawing emptiness that had become my constant companion, was a powerful motivator. A year was a small price to pay for financial freedom. I imagined the city fading away, the grime and noise replaced by quiet, by space, by possibility. The thought of escaping my current reality, of shedding this skin of failure, was intoxicating. The journey to Blackwood Creek was a blur of gray highways and increasingly desolate landscapes. The city gave way to rolling hills, then dense, ancient forests. The air grew colder, carrying the sharp tang of pine and damp earth. Raj, the city dweller, felt a prickle of unease. This was a different world. The GPS signal flickered, then died, leaving me with a crumpled map and a growing sense of isolation. The road narrowed, becoming a rutted track swallowed by encroaching trees. Branches scraped against the car windows like skeletal fingers. Finally, through a parting in the oppressive canopy, I saw it. The mansion. It wasn't just old, it was a behemoth of decaying grandeur. Ivy, thick as rope, strangled the walls, its tendrils creeping into every visible crack. A wrought iron gate, rusted and askew, sagged open as if in weary welcome. The air here was heavy, still, and unnervingly silent. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just a profound, suffocating quiet. The lock groaned a protest as I turned it, a sound that echoed through the cavernous foyer, something metallic and stagnant. I spent the first few days in a daze, exploring the cavernous rooms. Cobwebs draped furniture like macabre shrouds. Portraits with unnervingly lifelike eyes seemed to follow me. The silence was broken only by the creaks and groans of the old house settling, sounds that seemed to have a rhythm, a deliberate cadence. I tried to call my landlord to tell him I was okay, that I'd found a solution. No signal, not a single bar. The isolation was more complete than I'd anticipated. One evening, driven by a restless curiosity, I found myself in a section of the house that felt distinctly out of place. It was a long, narrow passage, unlike the ornate rooms I'd explored. A low, persistent hum vibrated through the soles of my shoes. The hallway was lit by a series of dull, pulsing red lights, casting an eerie, almost nauseating glow. It felt wrong, utterly wrong. The hum wasn't just mechanical, it felt like a deep, resonant thrumming, a pulse that vibrated not just in the air, but in my bones. What was hidden behind these sterile, metallic doors in this forgotten corner of the mansion? The eviction notice felt like a cruel joke, a final, pathetic jab from a life I was desperate to shed. I crumpled it, the dry paper crackling like a dying ember. Raj, that's me, and this decaying monument to a forgotten branch of my family tree was now mine. Mine. The lawyer's words echoed in my mind, a smooth, disembodied drone promising a fortune if I just lived here for a year, in this mausoleum. The air inside was thick, heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something faintly metallic like old pennies. My footsteps, usually so sure, seemed to hesitate on the grand, decaying staircase. Each creak of the ancient wood was a whispered warning, a breath held just before a scream. I told myself it was just an old house settling. Of course it was. What else could it be? My first few days were a blur of unpacking and a gnawing sense of unease. The sheer size of the place was overwhelming. Rooms stretched into darkness, filled with furniture draped in ghostly white sheets. It wasn't an absence of noise, but a presence. A watchful quiet that pressed in on my ears. I tried to rationalize. The The way doors would sometimes swing open or slam shut with a startling violence that made me jump. The persistent, low hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls, a vibration felt more than heard. Old houses do that, I'd tell myself, running a hand over the peeling wallpaper, the faded floral pattern like a bruised memory. One evening, while trying to locate the fuse box, a task that involved navigating a labyrinthine basement that smelled of damp earth and something acrid, like battery acid, I found myself in a long, narrow corridor. The walls were lined with rows upon rows of humming server racks. They're monotonous from a stark contrast to the creaks and groans of the rest of the house. And everywhere, casting an unnatural, pulsing glow, were red lights. They blinked in unison, a slow, rhythmic beat that felt like a dying heart. The will had mentioned it, a brief, almost dismissive note about its necessity for the estates. Records. I didn't understand. Records of what? And why here in this forgotten corner of a forgotten mansion? The steady, mechanical pulse of the machines was unnerving. It felt alien, out of place in the organic decay of the house. I ran my hand along one of the cold metal casings. It vibrated beneath my touch, a tremor that seemed to travel up my arm. As I stood there, bathed in the crimson light, a flicker of movement caught my eye at the far end of the corridor. It elongated, then retracted like a hesitant limb. My breath hitched. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Nothing, just the endless rows of machines and their relentless crimson pulse. It was the strain, I told myself. The isolation, the stress of the eviction notice, the overwhelming nature of this inheritance. My mind was playing tricks on me. I turned to leave, my steps a little too quick, a little too loud on the concrete floor. It was too soft to discern words, but the intent felt clear, a sibilant hiss that raised the fine hairs on my neck. I spun around. The corridor was empty. The red lights continued their steady, infernal beat. The hum of the servers seemed to deepen, taking on a more insistent tone, as if they were aware of my fear. I backed away, my heart beginning to thud a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The metallic tang in the air seemed stronger here, sharp and coppery. Had I really heard something? What was this place truly, and what was it waiting for? The silence in the mansion was a thick, suffocating blanket. It pressed in on me, a physical weight that made breathing a conscious effort. Days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting patterns of dust motes dancing in the infrequent shafts of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows. I tried to keep busy, cataloging the decaying furniture, the peeling portraits of stern, unfamiliar faces. But the sheer scale of the decay was overwhelming, a monument to neglect that mirrored the emptiness I felt inside. My phone had died days ago, the battery refusing to hold a charge, no matter how long I left it plugged into the wall. The landline, a relic with a rotary dial, offered only a dead dial tone. The nearest town was miles away, a journey I'd postponed, telling myself there was still so much to explore here, so much to understand about this place. The will, after all, had been specific. Prosperity awaits the diligent inheritor. It had read. Diligent, I was certainly that, but the wealth felt like a phantom, a promise whispered by a ghost. One evening, a persistent, low hum began to throb through the floorboards. It wasn't the creaks and groans I'd grown accustomed to, the settling sighs of an ancient structure. This was mechanical, insistent. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in this house, nudged me forward. I found myself in a long, narrow hallway. The air was frigid, a stark contrast to the stagnant warmth of the rest of the mansion. It bit at my exposed skin, raising gooseflesh. The hum was louder here, a resonant vibration that seemed to travel up my spine. Above each door, small, blinking red lights cast an eerie, pulsing glow. They looked like watchful eyes, unblinking and predatory. I ran a hand along the cool metal of the nearest door. It was smooth, unnervingly so, devoid of the rust and grime that coated everything else in this house. A small, rectangular slot was set into the center. The hum intensified, a low thrumming that vibrated in my teeth. It felt alive. Then a flicker, a shift in the red lights. One of them directly opposite me began to pulse faster, its rhythm accelerating like a frantic heartbeat. The hum deepened, taking on a guttural quality, a low growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls. My breath hitched. My palms felt slick, and I instinctively pulled my hand away from the door. Images flashed behind my eyes, not memories exactly, but sensations. The sharp sting of a playground bully's fist, the gnawing shame of a failing grade. These were the things I'd buried, the insecurities I'd hoped this grand inheritance would help me outrun. But here in this frigid, humming corridor, they clawed their way to the surface, sharp and vivid. The red light pulsed faster, a frantic staccato. The hum rose in pitch, a keening wail that scraped at my nerves. I backed away, my boots scuffing softly on the polished concrete floor. Each step felt like a betrayal, a confession of my fear. I turned and ran. My footsteps echoed, a frantic drumbeat against the rising wail. I didn't look back, I couldn't. The cold air clung to me, a spectral embrace. I burst back into the main hall, gasping for breath, my lungs burning. The hum, though fainter, still resonated in my bones. There was the house listening. There was it feeding on the echoes of my deepest anxieties. And if so, what would happen when it had consumed them all? The silence was a tangible thing, a pressure against my eardrums. I'd tried to fill it with music, with the drone of podcasts, but the house seemed to swallow every sound, leaving only the echo of my own ragged breaths. The dust motes, once my only companions in the vast, echoing rooms, now seemed to watch me, their slow dance a mocking ballet. My initial determination to catalog the mansion's decay, to find the source of the whispers I'd heard, had curdled into a gnawing obsession. I felt it in my bones, a cold seep that had nothing to do with the draft snaking through the broken panes. My writing, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. I'd been trying to document everything, to give structure to the encroaching chaos, but the words themselves felt tainted. Sentences I'd painstakingly crafted twisted into meaningless loops, mirroring the impossible geometry of the house. Sleep offered no respite. One afternoon, a flicker of movement caught my eye from the corner of the drawing room. But it lingered, coalescing into a form that was almost, but not quite, human. It was tall, gaunt, and it seemed to be watching me from the threshold of the hallway. My heart, a traitorous organ, began to thrum a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. I blinked and it was gone, vanished as if it had never been. I found myself drawn to the west wing, a section of the mansion I'd previously avoided. It was said to be the oldest part of the house, a place where the original owner, my distant relative, had spent most of his time. The air grew heavier as I approached, thick with the scent of decaying paper and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. My fingers traced the intricate carvings on a heavy oak door at the end of a narrow corridor. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration emanated from it. I pressed my ear against the surface. A low, steady hum, like 1,000 tiny machines working in unison, filtered through. It was a sound utterly alien to this decaying edifice. I'd stumbled upon it by accident days ago, a forgotten utility access panel hidden behind a tapestry. Red emergency lights pulsed rhythmically, casting a sickly glow on rows of humming server racks. It was a stark, incongruous anomaly in the mansion's ancient, decaying heart. I hadn't dared go further then, spooked by the sheer foreignness of it. But now, the memory of that hum, that pulse of artificial life, drew me back. I pushed the oak door. It groaned in protest, the hinges shrieking like tortured souls. The hum intensified, a physical sensation now, vibrating in my teeth. The air within was frigid, stealing the warmth from my lungs with each inhaled breath. The red lights pulsed, painting the dust motes in an infernal glow. Rows upon rows of servers stretched into the dimness, their silent, blinking lights like 1,000 watchful eyes. What was all this? Who had built it? And why was it hidden here in the bowels of this forgotten house? My hands trembled as I ran them over the smooth, cool metal of a server tower. The hum seemed to resonate within my own body, a discordant symphony that set my nerves on edge. I felt a strange pull, a compulsion to understand, to unravel this technological secret buried beneath centuries of neglect. This was the fear of the unknown, of something vast and alien lurking just beneath the surface of reality. I spotted a console, its screen displaying a cascade of rapidly scrolling text. It was code, dense and incomprehensible. But as I stared, a single line seemed to stand out, glowing brighter than the rest. It was an address, a string of numbers and letters that meant nothing to me. Yet I felt an overwhelming urge to remember it, to commit it to memory. My fingers, as if guided by an unseen force, began to tap them out on the dusty surface of the console. The hum seemed to deepen, to acknowledge my presence. Was this the key? Was this hidden technology the source of the house's malevolence, or merely another layer of its elaborate deception? I was trapped not by walls, but by a growing, suffocating understanding that this house was not merely haunted, but alive, and it was feeding on me. I felt a profound sense of being watched, not by ghosts, but by something far more intricate, far more patient. As I stood there, bathed in the pulsing red light, a faint, almost imperceptible shift occurred in the air. The hum momentarily dipped, as if the machines themselves had held their breath. Then it returned, stronger than before. A faint, metallic tang, like old blood, now mingled with the sterile air. Was there more? Was this just the beginning of what the house wanted me to find? The air in the server room corridor, cold, humming. Red lights was thick, almost viscous. It clung to my skin like a second, damp layer. Every step I took sent a shiver up my spine, not from the chill, but from the sheer, unyielding wrongness of it all. The low thrum of unseen machinery vibrated through the soles of my boots, a constant, invasive pulse that felt like the house's own diseased heartbeat. It was a sound that burrowed into my skull, a relentless reminder of its presence, its awareness. I'd followed the faint scent of ozone, a metallic tang that prickled the back of my throat, down a series of service tunnels I hadn't known existed. This place, this humming, red-lit artery, felt like the true core. The will had mentioned an archive, a place to secure his legacy. I'd assumed it was a dusty library, not this sterile industrial maw. Each flicker seemed to watch me, to assess me. I held my breath, listening. Raj, Raj, Raj. It was so soft. I almost convinced myself it was the blood rushing in my ears. Almost. My fingers, slick with a nervous sweat, fumbled with the latch on a heavy steel door. It felt wrong, too perfect for this decaying edifice. Decay, not the musty scent of old wood, but something deeper, more organic. Inside, the space was vast, a cavernous chamber dominated by rows upon rows of towering server racks. The red lights here were brighter, more insistent, bathing everything in an infernal glow. Cables snaked across the floor like metallic vines, and the hum was deafening, a physical pressure that made my teeth ache. But it wasn't the sheer volume of technology that seized my attention. It was the screens. Why would an archive require this much processing power? What was being stored or processed here? My gaze swept across the room, searching for any clue, any explanation. Then I saw it. In the center of the chamber, a single console stood apart. It glowed with a soft, ethereal blue, a stark contrast to the pulsing crimson surrounding it. And on that screen, displayed in a stark, blocky font, was a single word. Observed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the house's monotonous hum. Observed? By whom or by what? I took a hesitant step forward, my boot crunching on something brittle on the floor. I looked down. It was a small, desiccated insect, its legs curled in a final, desperate posture. Then another and another. The floor was littered with them, a silent, dusty testament to something that had been here before me. It was no longer a faint sibilance. It was a chorus of voices, overlapping, indistinct, yet undeniably present. They seemed to emanate from the very air, from the humming machines, from the pulsing red lights. They spoke of forgotten things, of hunger, of a patience that spanned centuries. My hand trembled as I reached for the console. The surface felt cool, unnervingly so. As my fingers brushed against the screen, the blue light flared and the word observed flickered, replaced by a single static image. It was a photograph. He was standing in what looked like a ballroom, ornate and familiar. It was the main hall of this very mansion. My breath hitched. The faces of the spectral figures I'd glimpsed in the upper floors flashed through my mind. This wasn't just a house. It was a trap. And the archive wasn't for storing information. It was for cataloging its victims. You are ours now. You will be observed forever. The red lights pulsed faster, mirroring the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. The screen flickered again, the image of the man replaced by a series of numbers, a countdown. I wanted to run, to scream, to claw my way back through the tunnels and into the sunlight, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The house wasn't just a building, it was a predator, and I had stumbled into its gullet. The hum of the servers seemed to deepen, to vibrate with a triumphant, hungry resonance. I looked at the countdown, a mere few minutes remaining. What would happen when it reached 0? What was the house waiting for? The hum. It was the first thing I noticed, a low thrumming that seemed to seep into my bones. Now, standing in the server room corridor, cold, humming red lights, it was a physical presence. It vibrated through the concrete floor, up my legs, into my chest. The air was frigid, biting at my exposed skin, carrying the faint, acrid scent of ozone. Red lights pulsed, slow and deliberate, casting long, dancing shadows that distorted the metallic sheen of the server racks lining the walls. Each pulse felt like a heartbeat, a vast, mechanical lung-drawing breath. I thought I could just leave, pack a bag, find the nearest road, and never look back, but the will. Now it was actively holding me. The tunnels, once an escape route, now felt like veins leading me deeper into its pulsing core. My hands trembled as I reached for the heavy steel door at the end of the corridor. It was the only exit I'd found down here, the one that had led me to this infernal nexus of wires and blinking lights. The cold metal was slick beneath my fingertips, a shocking contrast to the dry, dusty air of the rest of the mansion. I pushed. Nothing. It was locked or barred from the other side. My breath hitched. I tried again, putting my shoulder into it, a desperate surge of adrenaline coursing through me. The door didn't budge. It was as if it were part of the wall itself, fused shut. I backed away, my eyes scanning the endless rows of servers. They hummed a ceaseless, monotonous song that grated on my nerves. They were these the house's eyes, its brain? The will had mentioned something about preserving the legacy. Legacy of what? My gaze landed on a console, a lone terminal glowing with a soft, blue light, an island of relative normalcy in the crimson tide. It was the only thing here that didn't scream of malevolence. Hesitantly, I approached. The screen flickered to life as I drew nearer, displaying lines of code, a language I barely understood, yet it felt vaguely familiar, like a half-forgotten dream. I ran my fingers over the cool, smooth keyboard. My mind raced. Raj, think. I ran not trapped. There has to be a way. The house had shown me its power, its ability to twist reality, to feed on my fears, but I had seen its workings. I had seen the mechanisms. Then I remembered the journal, the cryptic entries from the previous owner, the one who had built this place. He'd written about control, about directing the flow. He'd been trying to manage whatever this was, not just live in it. He'd been trying to program it. My heart leaped. Could I use his own tools against the house? I started typing, my fingers clumsy at first, then gaining a desperate speed. I tried keywords, fragments of phrases from the journal, anything that felt like it might unlock a secret. Sequence, override, gate. The hum of the server seemed to intensify, a low growl building beneath the steady drone. The red lights pulsed faster, like an anxious heartbeat. Suddenly, a new line of text appeared on the screen, stark white against the blue. It wasn't code, it was a question. What do you truly desire, Raj? My breath caught. It was as if the house itself was speaking, its disembodied voice echoing in the sterile space. I stared at the words, my mind a sudden blank. Desire? All I desired was to be out, to be free. But the house? It knew me. It had been watching, learning. It knew about the gnawing emptiness, the yearning for something more that had always plagued me. I hesitated. To answer truthfully might be to give it the very ammunition it needed, but to lie. Would it even accept a lie? The red lights flickered, casting my face in a ghastly hue. The hum deepened, a resonant thrum that made my teeth ache. Then a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. It wasn't a shadow cast by the lights, it was something else, something that shouldn't exist. The console beeped, the question still hanging there, waiting. What did I truly desire? The house was waiting for my answer. A hunger for survival, a hunger to fight. Could I give it an answer it wouldn't expect? Or was this just another trap designed to break me completely? The metallic tang of ozone pricked my nostrils, a sharp counterpoint to the cloying dust that usually clung to everything in this cursed place. I stood at the entrance to the server room corridor, cold, humming red lights. The air here was different, thin, and the hum. It vibrated not just in my ears, but deep within my bones. It was a relentless thrum, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to pulse with the house's own dark rhythm. My knuckles were white where I gripped the heavy, rusted pipe I'd scavenged from the old boiler room. It felt inadequate, a child's toy against the unseen forces that had been playing with me for weeks. The will. It had promised wealth, a fresh start, and that word. Desire. What did it want from me? The corridor stretched before me, a narrow passage lined with racks of blinking, archaic machinery. Each blink felt like an eye opening, a silent witness to my trespass. The hum intensified as I took a hesitant step forward. It felt like wading into a physical substance, a dense, vibrating wall pressing against me. I remembered the cryptic note I'd found tucked inside the grandfather clock in the main hall. The heart of the machine, it had read, holds the key to your freedom and its deepest hunger. I dismissed it as more of the old relative's eccentricities, but now it felt like a directive. This was the heart, this humming, pulsing alien space. My boots scuffed against the grated floor. The sound, amplified by the enclosed space, seemed to echo endlessly, a solitary intrusion. I tried to focus, to push back the rising tide of panic. Raj, I told myself. I am Raj, I am here for a reason. The money, freedom. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. I spun around, pipe raised, heart leaping into my throat. Nothing, just the rhythmic blinking of the server lights, the relentless hum. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming, a prickle on the back of my neck that refused to subside. I forced myself to move deeper into the corridor. Then the hum changed. It deepened, a low growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls. My breath hitched. My hands trembled, the pipe feeling slick and heavy. I could feel it now, the house's awareness sharpening, focusing on me. It was no longer just a backdrop to my torment. It was an active participant, a predator sensing its prey. Suddenly, a vision flashed before my eyes. Not a memory, but something conjured. A scene from my childhood. The playground, the scraped knees, the humiliation of being the last one picked for the team. The taunting laughter of the other children, sharp and clear, echoing in the sterile hum of the servers. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to shake it off, but the images persisted, vivid and cruel. It was my fear, my deepest shame, being weaponized. When I opened my eyes, the corridor seemed to stretch infinitely, the machines blurring into a chaotic mess of wires and blinking lights. Alone, forgotten, weak, nobody. My legs felt like lead. I wanted to turn to flee back into the relative safety of the dust-filled halls, but the will, the promise, the house wanted a confrontation. It was forcing my hand. I took another step, then another, my gaze fixed on the far end of the corridor, where the light seemed to dim, where the hum reached its most deafening crescendo. What lay at the end of this path? Was it the source of the house's power, or merely another elaborate trap? A low electronic whine cut through the hum, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was a sound of anticipation. The house was waiting, and I, against all my instincts, was walking right into its maw. How much longer could I withstand this assault on my mind? I took a breath, the stale air scratching at my throat. My hand, slick with sweat, tightened around the heavy iron poker. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was all I had. The will, that damned will. It had promised riches, but delivered only this slow, suffocating terror. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the broken panes felt like a deliberate taunt. The house knew I was here. It had been waiting. The grand staircase loomed, a skeletal maw leading to the upper floors. I had avoided it for days, a primal instinct screaming at me to stay on the ground. But the will's final clause, the one about the heart of the house, had echoed in my mind. It was a riddle, a trap, and I was walking right into it. The opulent wallpaper, once a faded tapestry of forgotten lives, now seemed to writhe with unseen movement. My own reflection, caught in a tarnished mirror, was a gaunt stranger, eyes wide with a fear I barely recognized. I tried to dismiss it, to focus on the prize, the inheritance, the escape. But the house fed on doubt, on despair. A low thrumming began to vibrate through the soles of my boots. It wasn't the wind. It was deeper, more resonant, like a giant, sleeping beast stirring in its slumber. It seemed to emanate from the west wing, a section I had meticulously avoided, its doors sealed shut with thick chains. The will had been specific. The west wing held the key. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I could feel it, a palpable pressure building in the air, pressing down on my chest. Each step was a battle, a wrestling match with my own screaming nerves. I reached the landing. The chains on the west wing door were thick, rusted, but a faint, sickly green light seeped from beneath the wood. The thrumming intensified, a deep, guttural pulse that seemed to synchronize with my own racing blood. I fumbled with the chains, my fingers numb and clumsy. The light beneath the door pulsed, brighter now, casting an unholy glow on the dust-covered floor. A foul, metallic odor like old blood and ozone began to seep into the corridor. With a final, desperate heave, the last chain snapped, clattering to the floor. The door swung inward, not with a creak, but with a low, drawn-out groan, as if the house itself was exhaling. I stepped across the threshold, my eyes adjusting to the unnatural light. The humming was incessant, a high-pitched whine that scraped at my sanity. Rows upon rows of massive black server racks stretched into the gloom, their indicator lights blinking in a hypnotic, disorienting rhythm. The red glow painted everything in shades of arterial blood. This was the heart of the house. The will had been a cruel joke. The wealth was here somewhere, buried beneath this digital graveyard. But what was powering it? It wasn't a human shape, not entirely. It was amorphous, fluid, a distortion of the air itself. It pulsed with the same red light that bathed the room, its form shifting, coalescing like smoke caught in a hurricane. It made no sound, yet I felt its presence like a physical blow, a crushing weight that stole my breath. It moved towards me, not walking, but gliding, a silent, inexorable tide of pure malevolence. My poker felt laughably inadequate. This wasn't a ghost. This was something far older, far more terrible, woven into the very fabric of this place. It fed on the house, and the house fed on me. I backed away, my boots skidding on the polished concrete. The hum intensified, a deafening roar now, vibrating through my bones. The entity, if that's what it was, seemed to grow, to expand, filling the corridor. This was it. The end. But then a flicker, a memory, my grandfather's workshop, the smell of sawdust and oil, his gruff voice, explaining the importance of grounding. Grounding. The servers, the power. Could I sever the connection? Could I break the circuit that sustained this thing? I had to try. I had to choose. Fight or be consumed. The air in the server room corridor, cold, humming red lights, was a physical presence pressing against my ears, against my skin. It tasted of ozone and something metallic, like old blood. The constant, low thrum vibrated through the soles of my worn boots, a nerve-wracking lullaby that had become the soundtrack to my waking nightmare. My knuckles were white where I gripped the poker, its iron cold and unyielding. I remembered the heat. The inferno that had licked at the grand staircase, the roar of flames that had drowned out my own screams. I remembered the weight of the house, a crushing, sentient force trying to pull me down into its burning maw. And then nothing, blackness, thick and absolute, like being buried alive. Now this sterile, humming purgatory. It was a far cry from the opulent decay of Blackwood Manor, a stark contrast to the suffocating velvet drapes and the suffocating scent of dust and decay. But it was here in this utilitarian artery of the house that the true heart of its sickness had pulsed. The servers, a monstrous, blinking beast, had been the nexus, the source, the will. It had been a trap, a gilded bait for a fool. My great-uncle, a man I'd never met, had left me this monstrous legacy, not just the house but the knowledge it contained. The secrets etched into the very foundation, amplified by the network of machines I'd found humming in the bowels of the estate. It wasn't just haunted, it was alive, a parasitic entity feeding on fear, on memory, on me. I took a step, my boots scraping on the linoleum. The poker felt heavier now, a dead weight in my hand. I'd faced it. I'd plunged into the heart of the machine, into the blinding white of its core, and I'd done something, I wasn't sure what. I'd felt a tearing, a rending, as if I'd ripped a vital organ from its body, and then the fire. Was it over? The thought was a fragile bird fluttering against the cage of my ribs. I scanned the corridor. The red lights pulsed, steady and unnerving. No movement, just the hum. It felt different, though, less a predatory thrum, more a weary sigh. Had I broken it? My breath hitched. A sudden, sharp scent pricked my nostrils, ammonia, acrid and biting. It was coming from further down the corridor, from a closed door marked with a faded hazard symbol. I'd avoided this section during my initial, frantic exploration. Now the ammonia was a warning, a residue of whatever had powered the house's malevolence. I moved towards the door, each step deliberate, measured. The poker was no longer a weapon, but a crutch, a familiar weight to anchor me. I reached the door, my hand hovering over the cold metal of the handle. It was surprisingly smooth, unmarred by rust. My fingers closed around it. I twisted. The latch clicked open with a soft, almost apologetic sound. I pushed the door inward. The room beyond was small, bare, no servers here, just a single high-backed chair facing a blank metal wall, and on the floor, scattered like discarded thoughts, were loose pages. Papers, my great-uncle's papers. I knelt, my knees cracking. The air here was thick with the scent of old paper and something else. Something sweet, cloying like decaying flowers. I picked up the nearest sheet. It was covered in meticulous handwriting, a dizzying scrawl that I recognized from the cryptic notes I'd found scattered throughout the manor. This was it, the truth. It wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense. It was something engineered, something built. My great-uncle hadn't been a recluse, he'd been a builder. The servers were its brain, the house its body, and the will, the bait. I sifted through the pages, my eyes blurring with exhaustion and the flickering red light. Mine, it was all here he had known, he had planned for me. A profound weariness settled over me, heavier than any fear. I had survived. I had faced the core of the entity and broken it. But at what cost? The house still stood, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky outside the narrow, grimy window I'd glimpsed earlier. The hum was still there, a faint echo in the distance. Had I truly destroyed it or merely wounded it? I stood, clutching a handful of the papers. The poker clattered to the floor. My muscles ached, my head throbbed, and a gnawing emptiness resided in my gut where fear had once resided. The Blackwood Manor wasn't just a place, it was a consciousness, and I had severed its primary link. But the echoes would remain. The residue of its influence imprinted on the very walls, on the air. On me, I looked back at the chair. It was empty. My great-uncle's presence, or something else, something left behind when the core had fractured. The house was quiet now, but was it truly empty?